Today we're going to talk about mulch. Hopefully you can hear me. My microphone broke, so we'll make do. Anyways, there's 3 different types of mulch that I'm going to talk about today. There's living mulch, brown mulch, and inorganic mulch. In this bed I have 3 different types of mulch. So we have 2 browns. That is your wood chips, which I generally use in walking paths and in perennial type beds. Straw, which I like to use in my annual beds. And then buckwheat. Buckwheat is a fast growing, if you saw my Rooted Wednesday this week, it is a fast growing plant and it provides excellent mulching material. Because it grows so fast, it outcompetes for the weeds, and then it also can be chopped and dropped to add more nutrients. This is my 3 sisters garden bed, so this is where I use actually 3 different types of mulch. You can see over here in the walkway, I actually have more wood mulch. So everywhere that I walk in the garden, I add wood mulch because it has superior water retention properties. There are pros and cons to both, or all types of mulch. Wood mulch, because it is a heavy and dense mulch, the reason I like to use it on the walkways is because it takes a little longer to break down. Straw is lighter and airier and won't compact like wood chips will. And then living mulch, it provides a dense mulch, but with some breathability around the root structure and adds back biomass faster than your brown mulches are going to. So other types of mulch in properties that I use is interplanting. So this is where we have kale interplanted with garlic. This provides the mulching benefit, and it's also companion planting because the garlic helps to keep pests away from brassicas like kale. And then kale provides the water retention, and if you don't cover soil with something, weeds will grow. And so this is me planting something so that something else doesn't decide to grow. Another type of mulch that I like to use, especially in acidic loving plants, is pine mulch. Pine mulch, slugs really don't like to cross, so it has the added benefit of keeping slugs away. This is a brown mulch. As it breaks down, it will provide nutrients like nitrogen when it's green. As it's turning to brown, we'll release that nitrogen back into the soil, and then it becomes a brown mulch as it dries. Here is another living mulch. This one doesn't suppress the grass as much, but it does suppress other weeds pretty well. But this is bog cranberries. Bog cranberries, they spread, so I put them in between my blueberry plants, and they provide the mulch along with the pine needles and the wood chips to create more biodiversity. Plus these give me these little flowers here will turn into cranberries in the fall. So you get 2 crops when you would normally only get 1 because of the different levels of growing. So these cranberries are a low growing crawling, and then the blueberries are upright. So you get a 2 for 1. Here's another area where I use more than 1 type of mulch. So I just put a fresh layer of wood mulch down. That is strawberries. They're just brand new, so they'll grow bigger, along with my haskips. What I like to do is I like to keep perennial type mulch with perennial plants, and then annual type mulch or brown mulches with annual plants. For example, if you take something like clover, oregano, creeping thyme, and you plant it in with your annual beds, the clover, the creeping thyme, it will start to slowly take over your bed, and year after year you will have more work. When you use buckwheat in your annual beds instead, then they die with the frost as well, so you have a whole new fresh plate for the next year. Whereas in here, because I have haskips and I have strawberries together, they require the same type of nutrients. They require a more fungal dominant system, which is why we use wood chips, and they won't outcompete for each other because they grow on 2 different levels, and they both are prolific growers. So instead of one outcompeting for one or the other, they just kind of grow together. And again, clover for a perennial flower bed. This offers weed suppression, just so other weeds don't get a chance to grow. Nitrogen fixing, it will attract pollinators as they start to bloom. The only thing that I recommend is as your plants are growing, you pull out the clover around the base, like I've done here in the lupine, just so that it has some breathing room and they're not competing as much. So you want to remove around the drip line as much as possible, but then keeping it in between. I may add some wood chips just to kind of reduce the pressure of the clover. This bed is also a really good example of why I say do not plant perennial type ground cover in with your annual plants. Is clover spreads rapidly. Last year, I did not have a single clover plant in here, and this year it is spread out everywhere. So this is what would happen with your annual beds, and because annual plants are more tender and they take a little bit longer to shoot off, you would have the problem of the clover taking over. Whereas I, didn't touch the clover until earlier this week. I ripped it out around the roots because I knew it was going to rain. But the perennials still popped up no problem because they are also aggressive and they're stronger and have a stronger rooting system. And so this is where you need to take into consideration what you're using as mulch, especially living mulch. Finally, this is my orchard where I have, or food, I call this my little food forest up top. This is where I include both perennials, annuals, and browns. So because this is a perennial type system, you do with wood chips and other browns, you will have to top it up every year. They do not suppress weeds their whole life. They only suppress them for one season because they break down. So here I have a mix. When you have a mix of different types of mulch, you get the benefits of the green mulch, which will give you back your nitrogen and some of your other nutrients. And then your brown mulch, where you have your superior water retention benefits. It is better at keeping the weeds suppressed as long as you replace it each year. Normally you would replace this early spring. We're a little behind this year, which is why we have so much weed growth, because the wood chips are almost completely broken down. And so it needs that fresh supply. And a lot of people do worry about, or a concern is, especially with brown mulch, is a lot of people say concern about it. It requires a lot of nitrogen to break down, which is partly true. But here's how I do this: is when I go to add the second layer of mulch, is I either just leave the weeds that have popped up and use those as my greens, and then essentially making a lasagna type layering system. The other thing you can do is chop and drop, or when the fruit and the leaves fall off the trees, that adds greens. But generally speaking, when you are using browns as a top cover mulch, it breaks down much more slowly and does not use the nitrogen amounts that people are concerned about. And so because it decomposes very slowly and it's just sitting on the top, you're not having that leaching, and you don't have to have as much of a concern about it as you would if you were mixing it in with your compost. You would want it a little bit more balanced. But in this purpose, when it's on top, you don't have to worry as much. So like I said, I chop and drop the weeds because I'm hoping this weekend that we're gonna get this filled in and I can post a video, and then I don't worry about it.